All right, now let's discuss this. We are now joined via Zoom by Dr. Westen Shilaho, a research specialist in African diplomacy and foreign policy at the University of Johannesburg. Good afternoon to you, sir, and thank you so much for making time.
Good afternoon, Unati. Good afternoon to your viewers.
Now, Doctor, when you consider the history of Britain's rule over most African countries and how Kenya only became independent in 1963, how fitting is it for the outgoing president of Kenya, his call for a national mourning period in that country, considering how others have challenged how the British Queen's legacy is of her being central to colonialism?
Great question, Unati. The Kenyan political elite is Anglophile, and it's been the case since '63 when the British exited the country. So much so that I add that the Kenyan political elite are some of the most Eurocentric you can find across the continent. And therefore, it doesn't come as a surprise to me that he declared 4 days of official mourning and paid a tribute to the British monarchy following the demise of the Queen. But it's not a view that is shared across the board within the country. There are voices within the country that challenge that. And are aware of the dark history of the British Empire in Kenya, particularly during the struggle for colonialism. And when the fighters against colonialism, freedom fighters, were brutally suppressed by the British soldiers. And that history has not been forgotten by quite a cross-section of Kenyans. And they find it repugnant that the outgoing head of state could just whitewash that history as if it doesn't matter.
And I mean, when you also look at some of the most recent statements issued by African leaders, including South African president, after the passing of the Queen, of course, like you say, the criticism is that there is a form of whitewashing of Britain's brutal colonialism. I mean, some of the comments, of course, praising her for her diplomacy and praising her for her strength and so forth. Of course, when she took the reign, she was fairly young. But I mean, this was a 7-decade-long reign.
Yeah, extensively long. And you see it's about the symbolism, what she symbolizes. The British monarchy, which is seen to be, the symbol of international capital, imperialism, exploitation, and suppression of former colonies and interference in the sovereignty of former colonies, the maintenance of the colonial state in most African countries, politics of exclusion and exploitation, and the poverty you're talking about. Some of your colleagues on the ground, the kind of stories they are filing about inequalities and poverty in South Africa, in Kenya, and many other African countries. So it may not be the Queen per se as an individual, but it's she was at the apex of an institution that is held responsible for atrocities across Africa and many other parts of the world. In Kenya, it's been documented that the kind of atrocities the British committed, it was some kind of a veritable gulag, very strong word. So, yeah, it's a fairly dark history, between the British and Kenya.
Just on that point, particularly as it relates to Kenya, how then do we expect Kenyans to then, mourn and have a mourning period? I mean, if you consider the history, in 1952, in fact, the Queen, before she was Queen, was in that country. And, when her father King George passed on, and she had to leave that country and go back to the UK, where she was then proclaimed, Queen. How then should Kenyans mourn, particularly as you mentioned, the atrocities that happened straight after with the Mau Mau emergency?
Unati will look at it as some kind of perverse nostalgia between the Kenyan political elite and the former colonial masters. Because I will refer you to the just concluded elections in Kenya. I mean, the framing of the campaigns and the context was between the ordinary people ranged against dynasties. Dynasty refers to, monarchies. You rule by dint of your bloodline and that kind of thing. So that played itself, that politics played itself out quite sharply in the just concluded elections, whereby Kenyans felt they could not continue being led by individuals who are, had a right to rule, not for any other reason, simply because of bloodline and familial ties, and individuals they consider to be an extension of the colonial state and colonialists. And therefore, well, people go about their lives, but I don't think there is any universal agreement on this relationship, which is clearly problematic between the British and the Kenyan people, that those who will remain very much resistant to this attempt to engage in revisionism and portray a dark history in bright colors. And there are those who are going to celebrate it owing to some perverse nostalgia.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Shilaho, thank you so much for your time and analysis on this very topic. Thank you so much for your time.